Hello and welcome to another week of fusion writing. Exciting. We are going to be talking about character development and where it meets balance. So as usual, we will be splitting our talk between two pieces. And Victoria, want to say hi to our group?
Hello,
Say hi.
everyone.
Today, of course, is just our lightweight where we just introduce the topic. And tomorrow, don't forget to come back tomorrow where we go more in depth about the lesson. Then Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, we take it on into LiLLiPub where we talk about it and exchange ideas and pick up your worksheets. And Saturday, we all hop on a Zoom call and get to talk about it face to face and really feel like a call, like a class. So here we are, without further ado, and Victoria is going to introduce us to the topic of character development.
Okay, thank you so much for that lovely introduction. Um, as we are learning how to go through our format and what these lessons and classes are going to look like, you should start to be figuring out that this is our high level view day. So this is our compass that gives us the heading for where we're going. So with that said, first, I want to address an issue that came up over in the questions, and that is about plotting versus pantsing. And the reason I bring this up is because the last lesson last week, I went into a pretty in-depth guided plot worksheet. And the question was, do we have to use all of those plot points? Well, really, as the author, the writer, that answer is up to you. You get to decide, do you want to have a pre-midpoint battle or crisis that launches you into that next scene or section? Or do you want that part to be more quiet and not have that big action thing in the first half? Those are all choices that you're going to make as we move along. So to my beloved pantsers and then the puzzlers who are in the middle, which is mostly myself, I do a lot of plotting and then figuring out as I go. There's room for all of us. So please don't think that we're excluding the pantsers or the discovery writers who just like to sit down with pen and paper and sketch out what things look like and discover that in the writing process. You are absolutely not doing anything wrong. There is no right or wrong. So with that said, use the plot points simply as your heading, as that compass to guide you should you get stuck or if you need a way to navigate, and leave the rest behind. Just take what works. With that said, I'm going to give you a second thing, which falls under character development, which is going to help you understand how to get those characters down on the page when you're just getting started. Or if you've already done some character development and you're stuck or you're trying to work through how am I going to get them from here to there, this is what this is going to help you with. So real quickly, I just want to go over the three main major players that are going to play a part in your story. The first one is the protagonist. Okay. The protagonist is your good person. It's your hero. It's your positive person. So you're going to start by developing the main point of view of that character. Use the developmental worksheet as a prompt for details, which I'm going to share that on Tuesday. So you'll have that available as well. And then make a decision about what major transformation do you want this forward facing positive main character to have. Just simple notes, jot them down. What do I think about this person? Who do I think they are? Just start thinking through. And then how do I want them to change? So we'll talk more specifically tomorrow about what that means, but just keep in mind your first major focal point as you're starting to write is your main protagonist. Against that person is the villain. If your protagonist is your good guy, your villain is your bad guy. Start thinking about who are your favorite villains from your stories? And most importantly, why did you think they were great? Usually the answer falls somewhere in the realm of the villain relates in some opposite way to the protagonist. So your good guy and your bad guy have some main conflict that ties them together. That's what makes a good story thread. So your bad guy, as you're thinking about your good guy, how could they balance one another? See what I did there? Kathleen's going to talk about balance shortly, but how can those two play off of one another? And then the third one that I'll mention as a high level major player is an antagonist. There's a misconception, especially among new writers, that your villain and your antagonist are the same. That's not true. Your villain is your ultimate bad guy, okay? He's the main challenge to the hero or to the protagonist. An antagonist is simply an obstacle. It's an adversary. It's something that puts pressure on the story, but it doesn't have to be a bad guy. So generally, a villain is an antagonist, but an antagonist doesn't have to be a villain. It can be another person. Maybe someone is jealous and they're holding that main character back because they don't want to lose them, right? That's an obstacle, but it's not because they're a bad person or a villain. It could be an animal. What about Cujo? That's a story about a rabid dog, and that was a terrible villain and also an antagonist that kept the pressure, kept the threat going in the story. It could be an attitude. It could be a social or a family issue. Think of Romeo and Juliet, right? Feuding families, and the young lovers fall in love anyway. That's a family attitude. That's a family antagonist, but it doesn't really qualify as a villain, yet it throws obstacles in their way. It could even be a body of government or something societal. So as we talk through in tomorrow's video how to develop our characters, we're going to look more at how to get this done. So with that, I'm going to throw it over to Kathleen to take it away from the major players.
Well, thank you, Victoria. That was really fascinating. I especially enjoyed learning the difference finally between an antagonist and the villain. I'm one of those ones who thought they were one and the same creature. So that is really good to know. As Victoria hinted, what I'm going to be talking about today is the character trait of balance. Those of you who've been through my courses or have my book, you know that balance isn't a character trait in itself, it's a group of character traits, but they've got a lot in common. And the things that the balance traits have in common, which is quite fascinating, is that the correct answer isn't one side or the other. The correct answer is finding a balance. And the two sides are chaos when things get a little too wild and rigidity when they get a little too tight. And the point of the balance is finding that fluid point. And all of the character traits that go in the balance group together work towards having a character who is self-possessed and in self-control. If you think of your martial arts heroes, especially, they epitomize balance. Self-mastery is just a huge part of that. And it's a really fun trait to play with because of those toggling of those two extremes. And there are some amazing elements inside of balance, and we'll go into those much more deeply tomorrow when we talk about a little bit more about the challenges of balance and how you write balance into your story. But the main thing that we want to think about with balance, to ask yourself some questions, is when have you been pulled too hard in one direction? Maybe it's something that just a bad habit that you just can't let go of. Maybe it's something that's borderline obsessive. Maybe you're on your phone too much, or you can't quit watching kitten videos. For me, it's tiny home videos. I don't know why. My library would never fit in a tiny home. Yeah, I love watching tiny home videos. So letting things where you have the time for recreation, but you don't let it draw you away. Balance can also show up when it shows up as a temptation to do something pleasurable when duty calls. And then it functions in an interesting way because it can be a way of, oh, you don't have to do that thing that's hard. Come do this thing that's pleasurable. And will your hero be tempted away? So these are just some little factors that you're going to want to take into account. For example, have you ever had the feeling of being out of control? And what do you do to get yourself back in control when you feel like you're spinning off out of control? What about feeling self-conscious in a social gathering? Have you ever walked in and felt, oh, I don't know, and your whole thoughts, you want to think about other people, but you can't because your whole thoughts stuck on yourself? What happens if somebody comes along and says, oh, could you help me over here? The whole picture can change. Because you can let go and come out of yourself. And a lot of balance is that ability to feel comfortable enough inside yourself that you can come out of yourself. And that one of the dangers of imbalance is that you can get trapped inside yourself or your character as well. What about attention? Attention, surprisingly, has a lot to do with balance. Can you think of someone? Everybody knows someone who just has to be the center of attention. Have you got anyone in your story who's like that? Could possibly be an antagonist. And then there's another thing about giftedness. Are you comfortable with your giftedness? Are you free to express your giftedness? Or do some people feel like they have to shy away from it and cover up their giftedness? And maybe another one more thing to think about with that is challenge of being honest with yourself. If you can't tell yourself the truth, how can you be open to other people? So anyway, these are just a few things to be thinking about the concept of balance. But if you had to take away one thing about balance, it would probably be the word moderation, because that epitomizes, that's sort of the poster child of the balance traits is moderation, which is a character trait in and of itself. But the whole idea of capturing that center ground. So, Victoria, I was wondering if I could ask you a question about your characters. When you're talking about the difference of an antagonist versus a villain, because that was a big one for me. So, whereabouts would your antagonist show up in the story? Is he in middle, beginning, end? Where would he normally appear?
Great question. It depends on the goal for that character. So you could have, for example, let's say in the instance of you have a jealous character. Well, maybe you want to position that character early in the story so that as the story progresses, you can see them change as that jealousy begins to build up to the point where there is some kind of a crisis, some kind of a confrontation, a conflict arises from that. That's a simple example of how you want to use that as a slow burn over time to show this person is becoming more upset, more enraged, more agitated because of this jealousy that's building. That's a very powerful tool to demonstrate how someone is becoming more and more and more unhinged because of this trait. So that's a way to amplify a trait as an antagonist. Now, you can pop those little obstacles in at any point that you want to. Let's say you've got this going on in the background with this through line of jealousy, but then maybe at the midpoint of the story, something happens that is a weather event. Maybe there's a storm that takes out all the power, and you find that your jealous person and the person that they're obsessed with and the person who threatens this relationship are all stuck together in the dark in the same house. So using the weather as an entity antagonist, and then having the antagonist, which is the person who's carrying the jealousy, you can start to compound those things to give good conflict and build that story. So really you can pepper them in throughout depending on which ones you choose, or you can take one key person or thing and grow it in order to have that slow burn tension. So it's entirely up to the author. My advice is always play with the options. If I insert this here, then it means this is going to happen, and then that's going to happen. And then you can say as the writer, yeah, that's not how I want that to go. Maybe it's the right antagonist, it's the right thing, but maybe you've assigned it to the wrong character. I did that myself and I had to make some changes. So look at the natural outcomes of whatever that obstacle or antagonist is, and then decide, is that where I want the story to go, or do I need to make some changes and do it in a different way?
Oh, thank you so much. I'm wondering, I've been thinking about this when you mentioned the jealous character, that certainly a character who is jealous does not feel comfortable within himself. And that's definitely a character who's out of balance. So that
Yes,
balance
absolutely.
can be another way of looking at it doesn't just have to be your villain, it could also be an antagonist. It could be a very out of balance character.
I would argue balance is an excellent metric to use with every character. A lot of the traits will fall into certain areas where you know this is where they belong. But something like balance, and even like we talked about resilience last week, those are great metrics to kind of test the mettle of your character, to really get down underneath what their issues are, what their attitudes, their values, and start making decisions about, okay, if I'm looking at this trait and I'm using balance as the metric for it, if I shift that balance this way, then that's going to change things over here. And if that's the direction you want your story to go, then that's the right thing to do. If it's not, then change it back and maybe put in a different antagonist or a different scenario.
Yeah, so there's lots to play with today as we think about just map. The compass is just setting the scene for what we're going to be working with this week. So today is just getting you started thinking about it. Tomorrow we'll go into more detail, both on the structure side and on the character trait side. And then Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, we'll put up little challenges over in LiLLiPub where you can go over there and discuss the trait with one another and put up little snippets of writing if you want to do that. And of course, see you there on Saturday for the Zoom call, which is going to be a tremendous amount of fun. So that will do it for today for our compass, and we will see you back here tomorrow for the map. Bye-bye.
See you later.